Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah. Sorry about that. I think we're about 10 or 15 minutes ahead of schedule, and I took like a lot of people have, a sort of tactical break. You know what I mean? It's just going to go wrong, wasn't it? You know, you look and you think, I've got 20 minutes, and everyone's running around going, where is he? Has he run away? You know, and so forth. Anyway, thank you so much for inviting us to come and speak to you today. Like many of you sort of mentioned, it's been, 2 or 3 years since we've had the opportunity to get everybody together. It's actually, for me, been about 7 or 8 years since I've had the opportunity to come and talk and present at one of these kind of events. That's not because I was banned or anything, so don't be, I can't remember being anyway, but not to be overly concerned. Today we wanted to talk about something that we feel is fairly unique in the market and maybe is quite forward thinking. We might not be at the stage now where these things are really pertinent, but there's some concepts that we're going to throw around, particularly around, you'll see the title of the presentation, a multi-cloud platform for end-to-end open source data architectures. We'll go into, I think some quite interesting ways of kind of configuring things and replicating, particularly across cloud. We all perhaps sometimes want to be able to do that, but being able to do that really easily and with ostensibly a single click, 3 clicks actually. Is I think a little bit at the forefront. You may not have heard of us. Aiven, who's Aiven? What's an Aiven? Well, we've been around for about 6 years, and we're nascent to ANZ, but established in Finland about 6 years ago. And what we focus on is providing or making it easier for you to consume and use open source databases. Let's just move through. I don't know if I had a clicker. Did I have a clicker? Yeah. So we're invested. We're capital S serious about open source, about providing access to open source databases and event streaming services. And there's lots of companies who do bits of that, but we've provided a single platform upon which live, operate, and exist these 10 services that you can build end-to-end open source data architectures on one single platform. We'll look at what we sort of argue are some of the benefits of being able to do that from a platform perspective. So what's the attraction of open source? Well, I think we know these statistics, we know these kind of, some of the things that are going on in the space, but the community, the fact that it's really now at that point. I mean, if I go back and I think I work for some of the bigger, more, I suppose, well-known, large, red, proprietary software vendors who provide databases and things like that. And when I'd be out talking to customers, open source really was something that we kind of looked in the rearview mirror. So we might think to ourselves, it's kind of got its place. It's a bit quirky. It's nice. They use it a lot in open source, in universities and things like that. But this is a silly mistake, or if I look back, was wrong. I'd say, would you get in a plane that was open source? Would you take a drug that had been developed by a doctor that was open source? But that's not the case anymore now. I mean, we'll look at some of the uses in the moment, but I'm now looking across the grid, at the starting grid, thinking, here is this stuff. It's benefited from the community, it's benefited from the investment. We've got all this wonderful diversity and this innovation pouring in around the clock into releasing these products. And really now we do have really credible, highly secure alternatives, but there's still a little bit of a kind of an issue with managing this stuff. And we say it was free to download, it's free to install, you don't have any weird license restrictions around. If you install this on a VM farm, then we'll license you for the whole farm and we'll audit you and stuff. It gives you that freedom, it gives you that combi kind of camper van kind of, ability to scale and do, what you want with that technology. But there's still some issues. It does require some effort to maintain and support, and there are great companies now that provide managed services for these things. And of course, it's, as we're seeing, increasingly popular, particularly among that digital native space, and companies and organizations that are making that transition to microservice architectures, moving off those monolithic applications. They're turning now more to these open source databases. And I think as of 2021, I think Postgres was the most widely consumed and most widely used database around. So where is open source? Again, we've had people before me, better qualified than me probably, who were talking about this. The major clouds are running on Linux. 5 out of the top 10 relational databases are based on open source. We know open source is pervasiveness in smartphones and even in the automotive industry. I go back to my sort of ill thought through remark about would you get into an aeroplane that was running open source? Your car's probably got Linux in it and that now, right? And we kind of know these things. Sorry? But not Java. Okay. Who bought Java? Someone bought Java, didn't they? Yeah. Anyway, you never know, right? I might need to go back and go. It's still open source. So what we're trying to do is make data infrastructure easy and embracing the fact that people want to use and should be able to embrace this different way of working, not having to deal with proprietary vendors, having this freedom to innovate, to scale up, scale down, deploy it where they want, and so forth. Make it easy to consume and use without that extra doing an all-nighter and a weekend to try and fix issues and stuff. So there's companies doing that, and we're doing that too, and we're doing that in a platform. Aiven started, as I mentioned, 6 years ago. As you can see, like lots of organizations, you start where you're formed and you build out and you move to the US. And I think about a year ago, we started looking down to APAC, landed in Singapore, and just very recently, as of April this year, we expanded into ANZ. We've had SRE teams around the place for, I think, 2 or 3 years. So in Australia, our SRE team's been around for that time, and we're providing that kind of round-the-clock kind of support in different locations and so on, particularly, you know, around giving that high availability and staying compliant. Our founder was a developer. He worked in DevOps, got fed up with having to patch, and it was hard to provision and get new instances set up and managing VMs and so forth. So the mission of the company was really to provide open source in a secure, fully managed data infrastructure, and a platform you can deploy into any public cloud. Now, he started as a developer, and, you know, like a lot of us going back, there's stories about, there's a particular sofa apparently where he and his colleagues used to sit on for hours and code and write things. And it's kind of in our organization be elevated to sort of a bit of a sacred relic, you know. I often wonder now that if he's got a few dollars that he'd reupholster it and preserve it and make sure that all the interesting discolorations, you know, maybe we'll enter it in the Turner Prize or something like that, you know, in some years to come. But he comes from the same background as many of us, and I'm very committed to that open source kind of mission. So what is it specifically that we offer? Well, here they are. Here's 10 open source data services available under one roof. That triangular thing represents a roof. You have the choice to run it in any cloud that you want. And we take care of the availability and the setup and the deployments and so forth. And you can see within that, whether it's relational databases, Postgres, MySQL, time series databases, we've got M3, we've got InfluxDB, Redis for caching, and Apache Kafka with Flink for in-flight data streaming. Now, wow, you know, we can go and get Kafka from various places. We can get Postgres from various places. But what I think is interesting is it's under one platform. One platform, we'll see the benefits of that quite soon, allows you to do things that I think are much harder to manage and configure if you're selecting from a multiplicity of different kind of options, which might be proprietary or might be you know, provided by some of the larger vendors. So if we go into the platform in a little bit more detail, we take care of the operations. So the logging, the monitoring, we can connect into observability stacks. You can show them up on standard tooling, view them in Grafana dashboards and so forth. The availability is 4 nines. As I mentioned, we have multi around-the-clock kind of support teams and so forth. And within that, specializing in that data space, you know, I use the example that if you went to a restaurant, there'll always be a fish dish on the menu. But when you look at that data tier, and you're in that open source space, it's not just to making the platform available. When things go wrong with your specific instance and your specific application, our team can come in and work with you person to person about your problem. Why is this particular issue happening? And help you resolve that. So it's like going to, you know, a fish restaurant, because they do fish really well. You know, come to an organization like Aiven, we do data very well. We care about data infrastructure. We want to provide systems that encourage organizations that want that freedom, that don't really want to feel that they have to go to that proprietary offering, to have a fully managed cloud service that is secure, that is available, that is supported, that does have a community around it, that gives you that genuine now alternative. And there's a little other organizations are beginning to work through who are helping people and organizations migrate off, you know, legacy proprietary stuff into Postgres, helping them embrace Kafka in new ways. Thing about us as well is when we say open source, we mean we're open source. There's no proprietary hooks. Like it's been mentioned just before in previous talks, what's the point in having open source when you get on an open source offering, but there are proprietary hooks where you can't then get off it? So flexibility and zero lock-in is something that we are really 100% passionate about, and trying to do something really unique in the space. And then investing back into the community. Everything we do is open source. There is no lock-in. You can take our technologies, bring them back in-house, flip them somewhere else. There's nothing we're going to go, oh, we're locked into Aiven's widget or connector or so forth as well. Just at the top there, we'll dig into the Kubernetes and the Terraform, because that's where I think there's some architectures here that I hope you'll find interesting. We talk about control, visibility, security, transparency, that ability to move from one cloud provider to another cloud provider. You might think, why do you want to do that? But I was talking to someone at dinner it wasn't last night, it was Monday night. It was obviously a good dinner. But basically we're thinking, and it was mentioned earlier, is there going to be spot pricing for cloud, I'm being a little vulgar here, but it's going to be like for the next 3 months, we've got extra resource, we're offering a 20% discount on this. To certain organizations, there could almost be a derivatives market around cloud services. Well, we have the technology that can do that. And you might think, why would you want to? But I'll show you a customer that's doing that already with us. So just moving through complete transparency, how we organize things, how the platform's configured. All we need to care about is where it's running, what platform it's on, how much CPU you're using, the memory, the storage, your backups is all inclusive as one price. There's no and because you've used this connector or because you've, you want these sorts of backups. What you see is what you get completely. Now, here's one thing. If you talk about multi-cloud, and you wanted to have, let's say, Kafka running in AWS, but you wanted to use MirrorMaker and replicate that in GCP in different locations, you might be thinking, yeah, but data costs, it's all included. Moving from one Aiven location to another Aiven location, even though you might be using the South Carolina in the US GCP instance, but your Kafka cluster is replicated in AWS in Sydney, there's no ingress, egress network costs. On the platform, the negotiations we made, how we architect things, that's there. So that is then going back to, open source, but the freedom to do it too. There's no and. There's no lockdown, nothing you've got to kind of figure out, and calculate before you move forward. So all the backup costs, the monitoring, our SLA and so forth is included. We'll move forward. I thank you for indulging me and letting me just explain a little about who we are, because as I mentioned, been around for a while, but no one knows us here, and we come to these events to say hi and so forth. We talk about things that are a little bit more interesting now. So how do you actually do it? Well, it's easy. We've got a console, you come in, you select the service that you want. You can see here I've selected Kafka, and there's some others there that I can choose from. It's kind of already telling me what I might be looking at in terms of what I'm selecting in terms of CPUs and so forth. And then from that, I pick where is it going to live. So here I'm going to pick it's going to live in AWS. Where in AWS? Australia. All the cloud availability zones are available. If it's, AWS are doing it, we'll do it. And then within this too, I'd pick the plan, and that's where I talked about, CPUs, memory, storage, and I click boom, go, and that's it. Done. So there you go. 2 minutes. We say one-click deployment, but it's 3 clicks, I'll be honest, When you actually, that button that you press to do it, it all goes. So here's a customer. This is an actual customer architecture that's using this. So what are they doing? We talked about that one platform, the things that you can do. So what are they doing here? Well, I think they're a fintech organization. And they've got Kafka, they're persisting records in Postgres, it's the elephant. We have a squirrel too, I mentioned, we've got Flink. Have you looked at Flink yet? It's great. So they're persisting records in Flink. They are doing some things with Kafka Connect there. They've got some in-memory caching with Redis, you can just see at the top, the red sort of playing card sort of logo. And then they're exposing and putting some visualization in Grafana. And they're doing all that fully open source in our platform. And they're dropping that into BigQuery because they're, they like GCP, they like using those kinds of tools. And from there, they can do their interesting analytics and so forth. We also have connectors into Snowflake, MongoDB, host of other tools, AWS SC, think storage, forgive me, it's been a while. So here we are. I think this is, we're not talking about one product, Postgres, Kafka. You can do the whole lot. You can do that open source data architecture for event streaming and other kind of more complex use cases, and you can deliver that on one platform with Aiven, with the same SLA, with that same, the patching, the availability, the connectors, and it's all inclusive. Yeah, well, it's interesting. What they did then is they kind of got a bit worried because they thought, well, we're a fintech, we got Kafka, we're all in on Google. This is great, we love the platform, we've got our read-only standbys, but then occasionally things kind of get a bit out of whack and things go a bit wrong, and they thought, look, we just need to be extra double careful on what we want to do. Press the button, nothing happened. Hang on a minute. That's the thing, right? We want to do this. So on that same platform, they decided that they also wanted to have read-only standbys and failovers in AWS, and they also wanted to replicate their Kafka clusters because of these inherent risks and this the fact that they cannot have any kind of downtime. So it's an actual data architecture. And you can think, well, how is it that you would do that? I've talked to you about being able to do that one click on the same platform. I'm just going to really step off piste now and take a bit of a risk. I was technical many years ago, and then I sort of got moved into the darker side of things. So you see someone who predominantly spends most of the time in sales is going to click a button. I think actually there's a bit of a legacy that maybe my generation brings. When we were in the .com era, you'd have people who worked all night, to get a demo set up because, you had to go and deliver that product the next day and somebody said, don't press that button, and, there's no code underneath that and so forth, right? I think we've passed on a bit of that legacy. I think demos still they're a little bit too rigid. We just want to be a bit more transparent and open, and it engenders trust and things like that. So anyway, here we go. Fingers crossed. So here you can see, here's the platform, here's the console, here's all the services I can see running, and I can compartmentalize those down into projects. But when I talk about that one-click stuff and being able to shift workloads around, and could we be living in a situation where there's a derivatives stock market for cloud services and you can trade and move things around and get discounts if you have the platforms that provide that agility to shift workloads to take advantage. Let me go and let's look at, so here we got some Postgres, and I think it's running on Google Cloud, and we can dig into some of the other kind of interesting bits and pieces, the database name and so on and so forth. But if I scroll down through here, I can look at the service plan I have. So I can change the plan. That's one thing. I can move up. I need more consumption and more horsepower and so on. I can create a read replica. So that's what they did. Remember, they're in GCP. They want to go to AWS. How do we do that? We can click create read replica. We click where do we want the read replica, which location. I can go anywhere in the world. It's like having a TARDIS, isn't it? Just press a button and you're in Australia. Click the location, click the plan, scroll down to the bottom, and click create. So that's how we do it. If I go and I look at something maybe it's a little bit more interesting, and from experience, and I talked about all-nighters, I hope you don't have to do any of these anymore. But if you look at something like Kafka, which is a little bit more of a, you need a few reins on it sometimes to keep it under check. If I can find one that's running here that I'm not going to interfere with too much. I can't find the Kafka at the moment, and something's happened to my laptop. But the same process kind of takes place here. So I can go in, and I can just click, and away we go. There's Slack for some reason. Give me a second. I did say it was going to be interesting. Give me 2 ticks. You can tell it's live. Can we go back to the services? Maybe not. Go back in here. That's it. It's been nice now. So the same thing in Kafka. I can come in here. I can manage service integrations. So, I talked about being able to connect and pull out logs and things like that. Go in, look at integrations. Here's some of the things that we can log in, hook it into anyway, Google Cloud Monitoring. We've got connections into Prometheus and so on. But if I wanted to go in here and I wanted to look at Kafka Connect, the process is the same. I click on Kafka Connect, I go in, I decide where I want to hook that into, and I literally just move the location around. So if I use a See if this lets me do this. Don't want to upset it too much. It's the same process. So I've just used Mirror Maker with that existing Kafka environment. I'm now going to go and say, I want to run it on Azure, for example, and the process is the same. I select the plan that I'm on, I click Enable, it whirls away a little bit in the background, and lo and behold, we have just replicated our Kafka cluster from GCP to AWS or to Azure just by clicking a couple of buttons. And there's no downtime. We take care of that. We create new instances, we move them across, the DNS moves around, other clever things, and boom, done. Now, it would be, it's good to see that these capabilities are in place, but you might be looking there and you might be thinking, well, it's a little bit of a headache there, you know what I mean? If I go into this console and press buttons and move things around, that's just not scalable. So of course, like all good organizations, we provide integrations or connectors with things like operators, I think that's the right term, for Kubernetes. So you can deploy and you can manage and maintain your Aiven database instances from within Kubernetes, and you can see we've got that published here on the Operator Hub site. What I was tempted to do now actually is we could come in, if you really, really like it, and I can click on that link and I can just go through every single line of code within that. No? There might be people in the room who might actually enjoy doing something like that. I used to. So we have Kubernetes, and then through that, what's it done now? Hang on, did I click on it by mistake? I did mention I'd click on the link. I didn't actually intend to do it. So we could go in and we can use Kubernetes, and we can do the same thing with Terraform. So we have a Terraform provider. Everything that you can see within that console is accessible. It's accessible through our REST API, or you can come in and you can configure this with your infrastructure as code tools, such as Terraform. And it's available on the registries and so forth. Let me just make sure I don't click on that link again. So if I go back and I look, as well as having the facility to enable these kinds of architectures, and I say this particular customer wants to do this because they are very sensitive to things like downtime. They don't want to experience downtime. They want to be 100% open source, and we provide a platform that allows them to do that. We can automate that through things like Terraform as well, as well as everything you can see in the console, all those buttons I clicked, you can come in and you can automate them as well. Now, if we go back to saying, the benefits of a platform, there are indeed great organizations that are providing Kafka as a service. They're doing things with Postgres compatible databases are available on the major cloud providers. If I go back and, did I have it just up before? If I go back to that architecture, and I think if I was going to manage that using a tool like Terraform, and I had, a mix of maybe pure native open source offerings running on these cloud providers, on GCP, on AWS, and I also had their own specific flavors and versions and offerings, and I had a couple of other things as well. Ostensibly, the management of that, even with Terraform, is a little different. It's a little difficult. So the infrastructure as code scripts will be a little different for the different flavors. As you saw, we have our Terraform provider is published. I'm sure that the other vendors and the other proprietary solutions, they have their own Terraform providers. If you want to wrap all that together, you can see that administratively, things are going to be a little bit more complicated, particularly if you want to replicate and automate using Terraform the architecture that we were, say, looking at earlier. Well, with our Terraform provider and also this notion of a platform where everything kind of works the same, the SLA is the same, the underlying code and definitions and so forth, the API is the same. We think we can simplify that. So I've been even cheeky here as well and said, well, what if we wanted to throw Azure into the mix as well? If you've got one provider and one Terraform operator, the orchestration and management of that ongoing, there's only one thing really to worry about. You don't have to keep staying up to date with changes in definitions and syntax across other providers. You can just use one. You can just deploy that to whatever cloud environment you want. You could flip your Redis from Google Cloud into AWS on the Aiven platform. And remember, there's no data ingress egress costs for moving across and in between. That's consumed, that's available. So with this kind of platform, all in on open source, you can have end-to-end open source data architectures on a single platform with the same SLA, with the same service, with access to experts who know about data, who know about Kafka, to help with those weird, quirky things that happen sometimes. And that simplification from having the tooling that lets you access everything you can see in the console around, initiating databases, changing sizes of things, shifting things around, all available within one platform. So that simplification, that's really what comes with just having the concept of a platform. That's really the mission that we've been on. I just want to move on just for a moment. I think I clicked on that link again, didn't I? Can you see what happened there? I should have just remember for next time, just take a picture of it, then actually go in. And so we go back to that architecture. These kind of things, they're not ever possible with a platform, but they're manageable in a scalable way with the tooling that we put around that, with the connectors and the integrations with Terraform and Kubernetes and so on. So with us, as I said, all in on open source. We have a dedicated open source program office. Everything that we do is open source. We commit everything back. And we sponsor other organizations and other events as well. We'll talk a little bit more about that just here. So we have a conference called Uptime, bringing everyone together just to further promote. We think now, with platforms such as the one that we are providing, there are really credible alternatives to what have been the historical choices for robust, secure, highly available, scalable, flexible database technologies and offerings. So Uptime is a conference we're running. We've just got that going. We're sponsoring and promoting meetups. So we've got a Grafana meetup. If you just go to LinkedIn and you look, working with the Grafana team next week, or no, I think it's on Thursday, I think, this week, right? So if you want to have a look and come and learn a little bit more, then please, we're trying to build these communities, make it easier for people to use open source, to consume it, not just provide the toolings and so forth within that. We also provide a cluster program. If you are a startup at a certain stage, we'll provide up to $100,000 of credits. It actually looks like it's $100, that, doesn't it? Is it? Hang on, listen, hang on, we're not having that. Give me a second. Here you go, look. You've seen this done before. How's that? Gotcha, I did that on purpose, and you know that, don't you, right? So we'll give up to $100,000, right? To take companies to that next level, to invest. And why are we doing that? Well, we know as you grow, we're all right. Hopefully, we'll grow with you too. We've grown significantly. We've benefited from that investment as well. You can go and read a little bit more about our story and so forth as well. And that flexibility to deploy where you want, to move things around, is really, I think, what's setting us apart from other organizations, in that we don't just have the one thing, and sometimes you only need the one thing, but we're given that platform and that flexibility and that ability to move around. So listen, I really thank you so much for having us up to give the opportunity to tell a little bit more about a story. I hope that you found some of the things that maybe a little bit at the forefront at the moment, but this is interesting, spot pricing for cloud services. We're ready, yeah? So if you need a platform that is committed to open source, that can deliver these open source data architectures, the folks are out that can go much more detailed into much more complex scenarios around what we do and the kind of capabilities that we have than the little vignettes that I showed you just earlier. But I'd like to thank you for your time, and come and say hello at the booth. Thank you very much.